pastor of the largest church in the world, retired recently. I met Dr. Cho in 1980 in Orchard Park, New York. He had 80,000 members. When he retired, he had over 800,000 members. And he said, when I was starting out, I had 13 people in my church. He was a young Buddhist man, an Assemblies of God missionary, led him to the Lord. He got saved. Dr. Cho started building this church in Seoul, Korea. 13 members, couldn't seem to break off the plateau of 13. Dr. Cho was doing everything. He'd do baptizing, he'd do weddings, he'd do funerals. He did everything because if the pastor didn't do it, it wouldn't count. And one day he came down with heart problems, and he was in the hospital, and the Lord said, Cho, you're trying to be the great Cho. You're trying to do everything. Now I want you to do it my way. I want you to delegate authority and let other people have ministry. Do it my way, Cho. Well, that was a heresy in South Korea, and so Cho said, I'll obey, though, surrendered heart. And he calls his deacons in and says, I've got to delegate authority to you guys. In order to make the church grow, we've got to do it God's way. And they said, oh, no, that's what we pay you for. And Cho said, I told you, Lord. Now what? And the Lord said, ask the women. The men wouldn't do it. And so he called in a bunch of women and said, I need to delegate authority to you. And the men said, what about Paul, who said, I do not allow women to exercise authority over men? And the Lord said, if you delegate your authority to them, they can do it. So Cho delegated authority to the women. They started small groups, and the church exploded. And Cho had delegated so much that he could be away 6 months out of every year, and the church would still grow. He could be over here training American pastors how to be successful. Because he said the old Cho had to die. The Cho that was trying to do everything had to say, look, I have limitations. And so he buried the old Cho and said, God, I'll do it your way. Jack Hayford, the same thing, out at Church on the Way, Van Nuys, California. He couldn't get his church above 65 members. Oh, Easter had popped over 100. And one day he's praying, Lord, why can't I make my church grow? And the Lord gave him a vision of 2 trophies. One was called leadership and the other was called ability. Because Jack was trained in leadership and he had ability and he was trusting his leadership and he was trusting his ability. And the Lord said, Jack, I want you to give these trophies to me. And Jack said, but Lord, you've given me leadership and you've given me ability. Why do you want them back? And the Lord said, give them to me, Jack. And Jack said, okay, Father, I surrender all my leadership and all my ability to you. You build the church. In 6 years, it went to 4,000. Just by the surrendered heart of the pastor. Chuck Smith, my pastor, in Costa Mesa, California, tells his story on a CD called How to Accomplish the Impossible. It was a beautiful story. A church of 25, they called Chuck to be pastor there, and that church was split. And one day, Chuck realized he just can't do the work of the ministry. They were having contests. Oh, bring people to Sunday school and we'll give you a goldfish. And then they'd give out bananas. Come and be one of the bunch. And he always trying these schemes to get people to church. And he became so disillusioned, he threw in the towel and said, God, I can't do it. You do it. Well, his wife, Kay, was praying. She was really interested about the time the hippie movement started, and she was really interested in hippies. And so she prayed, Lord, would you please send some hippies to our church? Now, you can imagine a church of older people that wear suits and ties every week, and the pastor's wife praying that a hippie will come. Well, there was this hippie sitting out on the curb. I don't know what he was doing, eating a dead bird or something. And he could hear the sound of singing in this chapel. And the thought came to him, I've done just about everything in life there is to do, but I've never been to church. He said, maybe I'll just... So he wandered into that little 25-member Calvary chapel. And Chuck, at the end of his message, gives an altar call, and that hippie comes up to accept Jesus. And Chuck talked with him a little while and said, bring back some of your friends next week. Well, the older people are having a fit. Because if you're barefoot, there's oils that your feet carry that can ruin the carpeting. They had all kinds of reasons to keep the hippies out, and Chuck kept inviting them back. Well, the next week, the guy brought 12 friends. They got saved. And it's amazing how the Holy Spirit works with people when you let the Holy Spirit work with people. This one guy lived in I think it was a tree house out by the beach, and he went up into his tree house and he nailed up a picture of Jesus because now he's a follower of Jesus. And he rolls a joint. He's just getting ready to fire up the joint, and he looks at the picture of Jesus, and a tear comes out of Jesus' eyes. And he said, I knew he didn't want me to do that. And he said, I'd never done it again. Well, he tells those 12 that get saved, bring your friends next week. So each of the 12 bring another 12. There's 144 hippies. Now they got the old people outnumbered. Do any of you play music? Yeah. Do you think you could write some songs about Jesus? And believe it or not, that was the start of Maranatha Records. And they started having Jesus concerts and started renting the Long Beach Auditorium and started the church grew so much that and so fast they had to put up a tent to fit everybody. They put up a tent, had Saturday night concerts, and here's all these really what would be considered strange. People were calling in saying, your people don't look like church people. And it was the beginning of the Jesus movement. Thousands baptized down at Corona del Mar in the ocean, in massive public baptismal services, teaching every night. Literally thousands saved, and now over 1,000 Calvary chapels right here in America and 300 and some overseas. Because Chuck said, Lord, I surrender. I can't do it without you. He surrendered to the Lord. But human pride always tries to prove itself, doesn't it?